A message from ISIS, a message that included photos that confirmed the 26-year-old is dead. What is still not known is how she died. Late today, Kayla's aunt, Lori Lyon, remembered a caring, courageous young woman.
Kayla's calling was to help those who are suffering, whether in her hometown of Prescott or on the other side of the world. She has done more in her incredible 26 years than many people could ever imagine doing in their lifetime.
While in captivity, Mueller sent a letter to her parents, which they released today. It reads in part, "If you could say I have suffered at all throughout this whole experience, it is only in knowing how much suffering I have put you all through. I will never ask you to forgive me, as I do not deserve forgiveness." Mueller had worked with humanitarian groups in India, Israel, and the Palestinian territories, and by 2013 she was already in Turkey helping Syrian refugees. She posted this in 2011.
"I reject the brutality and killing that the Syrian authorities are committing against the Syrian people."
On August 3, 2013, Mueller entered Syria. She traveled with a young man believed to be a Syrian and alternately described as a colleague, boyfriend, or fiancé. He went there to fix the internet connection at a hospital. Kayla apparently joined him on a trip to a war zone off limits to Americans. The two stayed overnight, but the next day, returning to Turkey, both were grabbed on the road. Mueller's family didn't hear from ISIS for 9 months. Then in May 2014, their first message, proof that Mueller was alive. 2 months later, a ransom demand, about $7 million, or Kayla would be killed. That deadline passed with no further word. In the letter to her parents, Mueller talks about how ISIS treated her. "Please know that I am in a safe location, completely unharmed and healthy. Put on weight, in fact. I have been treated with the utmost respect and kindness." ISIS claims Mueller was killed in this building by a Jordanian airstrike. But today, a White House spokesman placed the blame for her death squarely on ISIS.
This, after all, is the organization that was holding her against her will. That means they are responsible for her safety and her well-being. And they are, therefore, responsible for her death.
We do know the president has spoken by phone with Mueller's parents. He said condolences. He also really commended Kayla and their daughter for her selfless work, and he vowed that he would make sure to relentlessly pursue those who had a hand in her death. And he also talked about the fact that they are going to work to bring her body home so that this community, her family, can have closure and Kayla can be surrounded by those who loved her as she rests. Aaron.
Thank you so much, Anna. Ken Bennett is the former Secretary of State for Arizona. He's been in close contact with the Mueller family since just days after Kayla was taken hostage. Bob Baer is a former CIA operative. Ken, let me just start with you. I know you spoke with Kayla's family just a few hours ago. You've obviously spoken with them during this horrible ordeal as well. How did they sound today, now that they've gotten the news their daughter is dead?
Well, her mom, Marcia, told me that they're doing well. And literally, it's the first time I've heard in their voices, her dad or her mom, a sense of peace that I have not heard in their voices for over a year and a half. And they sounded, well, her last words to me, her mom, were, "Kayla's now free." And so I think this is going to help begin the closure process. But they're doing well, she said.
Well, it's amazing that they are able to see this and see something beautiful in the horror that they've endured. Bob Baer, you just heard Congressman Gosar, who's also talked to the family, talking about other rescue attempts, one of which he explained as a man posing as her husband, going into the camp, trying to secure her release. Do you think that there were multiple attempts to try to free her, in addition to, of course, the failed raid that the president spoke about?
Aaron, I think what we're dealing with here, and of course we don't have all the details, is there's the failed raid, the Special Forces raid on that location near Raqqa. And then you also she had a friend, a boyfriend, as I understand these are from the hostages that she was held with, a Syrian, who did try to get her out. And in fact, there are some reports that, these are from the other hostages, that she converted to Islam at some point, whether in Turkey or in captivity. And I'm sure the Syrian man had family connections or connections with the Islamic State, and it wouldn't surprise me that he tried to get her out. But of course, Aaron, this is speculation at this point.
Right, it is. And of course, Bob, Kayla wrote a letter to her parents last spring, a letter that Actually, when one of the European hostages who was released for ransom came home, they then gave to Kayla's parents, and her parents released it today. This is a picture of the letter, which I read in her own handwriting, and I have to say it brings tears to your eyes somehow reading it in her own handwriting as opposed to reading a transcript of it. One sentence that she wrote says, "Please know that I am in a safe location, completely unharmed and healthy, parens, put on weight in fact, semicolon, I have been treated with the utmost respect and kindness." Bob, according to a New York Times report, though, ISIS had been cruel to other American hostages that were kept with Kayla at one point, particularly James Foley, who, of course, was beheaded. Some of the treatment described by the New York Times included prolonged beatings, mock executions, repeated waterboarding, a teacup of food a day, no mattresses, no blankets. Is it possible Kayla was being treated with kindness, was being treated differently as a woman, as a young, naive aid worker, as opposed to the other Americans?
Aaron, I think there's a good possibility. I've followed hostage taking in Muslim countries for years, and the hostage takers do tend to treat women differently. They wouldn't look at her, for instance, and they recognized her as being naive, a wonderful person, and they could have treated her differently, and they wouldn't have looked her as an enemy combatant as they did the journalists. They have mistreated, of course, Yazidi women, but those women, oddly, in the way they look at the world is they have fallen away from Islam, and they are apostates, and you can do what you want with them. Yeah. They wouldn't have looked at Kayla that way as a Christian.
And Ken, of course, I know that her family must just pray that's the case, that what she said in the letter was really what she felt and experienced, and not something she only said because ISIS would read that letter before they allowed it to leave. Obviously, she was taken captive in August of 2013. Her family got this letter this past spring. Then they didn't hear much. I know just one communication saying, "Give us money or else she will die." That was last summer. Did they hold out hope until the very end that their daughter was alive?
Absolutely. I talked to the family over Friday night and Saturday, and they were still talking in terms of believing and hoping that she was alive, and hoping that everybody else was thinking in that term as well. And then last night, which was unbelievable, that a father, upon getting the news that she was gone, called me out of a courtesy and said, "We've lost Kayla." And so something changed over the weekend, because Friday and Saturday they were talking as though there was still hope. But last night they called me and said that she was gone.
Well, wonderful parents. They did hope until the very end, and thanks very much to both of you.